Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, once again. Monday, August 8th, 2022. Time for another show. Time to catch up on catching up and catch up on the things that we already knew were true, but now have pictures of them being true. I guess the big story in that respect this morning. What have we? In Axios, apparently. Maggie Haberman tweeting around Axios's pictures confirming her earlier story that the former guy, Donald Trump, spent a bunch of the time in the White House tearing up his notes on what, I have no idea, and flushing them down the toilet. You all heard that story some time ago, but I guess now it's a new thing because there's pictures, and I'd love to know who took the pictures of the toilets in the White House and exactly how they felt about that, but maybe we can find out by reading the story. Maggie tweets around, new in Axios, Trump denied flushing documents as president, as I learned during the reporting last year for her book, Confidence Man. You know how all news now these days, of course, is truly broken by excerpts from books that reporters are publishing, and why they don't report the facts that they have. Sometimes they do when we miss them, and then they re-report them in the books, and then we get all exercised about them not reporting it earlier. But I don't know whether this is the case or not with the toilet thing. I have a feeling we heard it elsewhere at any rate. Anyhow, we got the pictures are the new thing. A Trump White House source recently provided photos of paper with Trump's handwriting in two toilets via Mike Allen. And then there's a link to the exclusive coverage in Axios. Exclusive. See the Trump toilet photos that he denies ever existed. Maggie goes on then to say, on the left is a White House toilet. There's two side by side here with the word qualified and a capital I guess, visible. On the left here, though, is a toilet from a Trump trip overseas. So they might have been just taking a picture of the funky foreign toilet, but it looks like a regular toilet to me, except for the fact that there's Donald Trump's handwritten notes in there. Under the Presidential Records Act, we are reminded, documents generated by and sent to presidents are to be preserved by the office. Trump's habit of ripping paper that had to be taped back up was known, and his habit of discarding them was not. And, wow, that's terrific to know about this president and what he did. And so, all right, well, that's news, and maybe we'll read the Axios article if it's deemed otherwise worthy. But on the other hand, if not, we can always send you a link to the Maggie Haberman's tweet about it, complete with pictures of toilets, which is really just terrific fun to start the morning with. There's probably other news. Yes, there was actual legislative activity over the weekend, which is a rare thing, rarer still in August. But it did happen, and the big bill, the reconciliation bill, was passed over the weekend through the Senate. There were some losses to the Byrd rule over the weekend as well, and we can perhaps go over the details of that. The usual MO for going over that material would be Greg joining us and saying, okay, well, here's the news. The bill passed. But by the way, what the hell happened? Because it also says this, that, and the other thing. And there were some interesting stunts pulled and some complaints from everybody all around. Republicans complaining about things happening to them. Democrats complaining about things that didn't get included because of the Byrd rule. Rank and file Republicans, or rather rank and file Democrats angry that certain things didn't motivate Senate Democrats to either get rid of the filibuster or overrule the parliamentarian or fire the parliamentarian over the weekend. That's one of the unfortunate side effects of, informing people that those things can happen. And, wasn't, I don't think there was any blood shed over it, but, sometimes people, whoa, I gotta fix that in just a second. Hang on a second. Greg, I think I have the sound still way turned up on this thing here. All right, let me adjust this. All right, you won't be the booming voice that I worried you would be just from, I had the volume turned all the way up from Friday. I guess I had to play something through Firefox. But the Skype feeds are the same volume. It was way super boosted.
Whisper.
Okay, no, now you should be good.
Okay,
right.
now I should be good. My volume was turned up too, so I had to turn you down.
All right, well, your whisper was quite loud, though. That was a good stage whisper. Excellent.
Well, as the late, great Joel Silverman taught us when he did our media training, if you move your face really close to the microphone, you can make your voice really low.
Yeah,
and it works. You sound like Lauren Bacall.
I have done that before, but it does. Yeah, and then you're so used to the voice sounding a certain way that it ends up sounding really crazy.
Yeah,
but it does do a thing.
Yes,
exactly. So the thing is, you got to step back and look at the big picture. I think Chuck Schumer was right. He's got a caucus.
Oh, Chuck, awesome.
That goes from Bernie Sanders, who wasn't happy, to Joe Manchin, who wasn't happy, to Kristen Sinema in the middle, who wasn't happy. And he's got to keep them all happy. And he made it happen, and he got this bill passed, along with a bunch of other bills passed. So I think it's fair to say that nobody likes him, but Chuck Schumer is certainly underrated in terms of his ability to get stuff done. The major one being doing a legislative runaround that caught Mitch McConnell flat-footed.
Yes, but
when he got the bipartisan CHIPS bill passed, and then all of a sudden snuck in the deal with Manchin that nobody knew about, including Sinema, and said, okay, well, now we're going to do reconciliation. And the Republicans said, wait a minute, you promised us this wouldn't happen. And Schumer said, I didn't promise.
Yeah.
I just said it probably wouldn't, and you didn't want it to, so you assumed it wouldn't. And it turns out it is going to happen. And they said, oh, well, in retaliation, we'll screw seniors. Won't that look great for us when it comes to election time? And, of course, they got clobbered for that.
Yep.
And that became yet another different bipartisan bill that Schumer not only got passed, but made the Republicans look bad in the process. And that's what happened yesterday. This was a decades in the making bill. In a lot of respects, especially for climate change. And it did get passed, and now it's in the hands of Nancy Pelosi, pretty good hands. If you think it's going to pass, you give it to Pelosi and say do it, and guess what? She'll do it because she's the GOAT.
Yeah.
At least when it comes to this.
Yes, well, all I think valid observations, to be sure. I recall when you were saying about Chuck Schumer being underrated. Harry Reid was underrated all the way up until it sounded like he was going to retire, and then everybody said, he was really great at this stuff. So
Schumer's not great at this stuff, but he does get it done. It's sort of awkward. There's no flair. And, as a native New Yorker, I totally understand his style of speech. I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
But it's neither impressive nor motivating.
Yeah.
But that's not
True.
the point.
All right.
He's not there to orate. He's there to get stuff done. So I'm going to start today's segment with actually a picture story, since you were bringing up pictures. This is a different picture, though.
Toilets?
No, voting machines.
Same difference.
Just a reminder, and this comes from Bridge, Michigan, which follows Michigan government. And there's a fellow named Matthew DePerno. He's a Republican candidate for Attorney General.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Okay. And the Assistant Attorney General in Michigan, because the Attorney General, who's a Democrat, is going to have to recuse herself because this guy's going to be her opponent. Okay. Says that DePerno should be investigated by a special prosecutor because he was tampering with voting machines. And DePerno said, no, I didn't. And it turns out there's pictures of the internal workings of the voting machines on his website. And the only way you could get to those internals is to break the seal and do the thing that's illegal.
I didn't do it. Some other guy did it. Yeah,
well,
maybe.
There's reports he was in the room when it happened. DePerno's an attorney whose Antrim County lawsuit made him a national figure in the Stop the Steal movement and a favorite of Trump. Michigan Republican Party delegates endorsed DePerno for Attorney General in April. They're going to make the nomination official at a convention in August.
That's this month.
Allegations are that DePerno used information from breached voting machines in his legal filings, and all 5 of the voting machines were allegedly taken to hotels or rented properties. He was supposed to be in one of those rooms, and he included a photo of an ES&S modem as an exhibit in the Antrim case that came from a tabulator. Yeah. And video footage of the tabulator appears to be on DePerno's website. So you're not supposed to be in there. You're not supposed to be inside that machine. That's the crime. And he's got pictures to prove it, which is really good because he's an attorney general. He's supposed to take pictures to prove crimes.
So that's interesting. So everybody's recused here. The current attorney general, the guy who wants to be attorney general is the defendant. It's going to be lots of fun.
It's Michigan. Welcome to Michigan.
Yeah. Right. I saw this story. They're getting in deeper and deeper, and doing dumber and dumber things. I'm waiting for one of them to, this is like, all the money from the bank vault was in my house because I wanted to prevent someone else from robbing the bank.
Right.
That's the reason I have this stuff. It's like Jim Trafficant level.
Exactly. So let me tell you a process story.
All right.
Because process things always interest me, and mostly because I really don't understand most of it.
Right.
And so I always like to have to ask questions. I ask questions of David, who's an expert on it. There's some other experts on Twitter, and one of the reasons I like Twitter is you get to ask people stuff.
Yes.
So there is a person, very good person, named Sarah Christofferson. She's legislative and policy director at Americans for Tax Fairness, but in a previous life, she used to be the legislative aide to Nikki Tsongas in Congress.
All right, that's a little ways back. Not all the way.
So she knows a little bit about how Congress works, and we were talking about the fact that there's a lot of Democrats who seem to be unhappy about one thing or another, especially about what happened with the insulin and drug pricing part of this reconciliation bill. What happened is the parliamentarian on Twitter, nicknamed the Parl, wound up deciding that it was okay for Medicare to keep price controls in and a cap on insulin, but it was not okay for private insurance. That was the ruling from the parliamentarian. So the discussion is, well, what are Democrats going to do about it? Well, they should fire the parliamentarian, as you pointed out in your opening.
Wants to do that.
That always comes up. And yes, you could do it, but no, it doesn't usually happen, and it doesn't always solve your problem.
Good to know, that's all.
And then the question became, well, what if Democrats want to do something about it? And this was all theoretical at the time because we didn't know what Democrats were going to do. And I happened to comment, having discussed this with you so often, that, it's really going to take 60 votes, and they don't have 60 votes. And she chimed in and said, actually, it only takes 50, depending upon what's going on. And that's happened on rare occasion.
51, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean a majority. You got to have 51, 50 plus Harris. And so
I think
how
I know
does
what
that
you mean.
happen? And I said, wait a minute, I'm going back to the language here. And I looked up the language and I had references. And she said, oh, that's really interesting. Give me those references, which I did. And they all say that you have to have a 2/3 majority in order to overcome a point of in order waiver in order to suspend the rules and get stuff done if the parliamentarian has ruled against you. And she said, yes, but, and Josh Chavitz, professor of law at Georgetown, chimed in as well and said the same thing. It depends upon whether or not the chair is agreeing or disagreeing with the parliamentarian. If the chair agrees with the parliamentarian, then it takes 60 votes as a point of order to suspend that rule and get a waiver and do it anyway. But if the chair disagrees with the parliamentarian, then it only takes a majority to decide whether or not the chair is correct. Yes, and it doesn't matter because the Democrats didn't have the votes anyway.
Right.
If you go with the 51 vote rule, you have to have Manchin and Sinema. That's not going to happen. They're not going to change the rule because that's essentially what it is. You're saying we have a new precedent. Byrd rule doesn't apply here.
Right.
So how many votes does it take for the Democrats to change the rule? Well, 50 or 60, depending upon the process by which they do it. I thought that was pretty fascinating, and it was an all theoretical discussion. And then all of a sudden, there's news from the floor that the Democrats are going to push this insulin thing and bring it to the floor anyway, even though the parliamentarian said you can't.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, how are they going to do that? Are they going to do it by agreeing with the parliamentarian or disagreeing with the parliamentarian? Because if they agree, that's 60 votes. Where are they going to get 60 votes? And that's exactly what happened.
Yep.
So they agreed with the parliamentarian and said, yeah, she said that we're not going to, yeah, this isn't allowed, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yes.
And so
That
John
happens.
Thune raised a point of order. And so the Democrats said, well, we'd like to waive that particular rule and do it anyway. They got 57 votes.
Yeah.
Probably, as somebody pointed out, one or two sincere ones.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
the rest were performative so that they could burnish their populist credentials, particularly for those who think they're going to be running for president like Hawley. I mean, it's not like he really cares about that stuff. But they got
No, I
57
wouldn't
votes.
imagine.
When Mitch McConnell voted no, you knew it wasn't going to pass. But nonetheless, as our very good friend Adrian McIntyre said once upon in Twitter language, who's a health policy expert, immediately tweeted, just check the latest tweets on insulin if you want a preview of midterm ads this fall. And so right away it was, Marco Rubio voted against capping insulin for you. And Ron Johnson voted against capping insulin for you.
Yes.
And it turns out that actually what the bill did, which did pass in the Senate, it's not a law yet because the House has to do it later. Nonetheless, what it did is it said, well, Medicare people can have the government negotiate prices on their behalf, and insulin will, in fact, be capped in terms of price at $35. And by the way, Medicare people now don't have to pay more than $2,000 extra for medicines. And
nice.
by the way, all your vaccines are now free, including the shingles vaccine and all the others.
Oh.
So there's a lot in that bill that's good for Medicare. And Medicare often drives and pushes prices for the private industry side of things. And so a lot of good was done, even though there's still unfinished business. So for those of you who think, oh, well, they should have fired the parliamentarian because stuff didn't get done, a lot of stuff got done.
Yes. It did, and this was an interesting way of doing it. There were a couple other things that got lost along the way, but lots of calls for just do it this way, just do it that way. I had the same question posed to me over the weekend by a frequent listener and Twitter Twitter correspondent
Friend.
Adam McGinnis. Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
well, yes. But let's say I'm looking for like an official newsy type word for it. Oh, yes, right.
Well, he's an
Correspondent.
official
That's
friend.
the one. Yeah. Okay. Official friend. Sure. Adam McGinnis, who asked the same question, and what's the story with this, and how come it? Some people say it only needs X number of votes, whereas others say Y. But yeah, that's basically it. If the chair or the presiding officer just rules in opposition to what the parliamentarian recommends, and it is only a recommendation at bottom, there's no force of law to it. But if you rule the opposite way, someone will make a point of order that that's not right, and then the question could be put to the body, is it right or is it not right? Or if you don't really want to set a precedent very strongly, you could just simply move to table the point of order, and that it is sometimes been said, if you've tabled the point of order, you have the effect of sustaining the underlying ruling, but that's a little weird and a little shaky. Like, no one had voted in favor of the ruling. They just voted to put aside the question of whether or not the ruling was bad. Is that the same thing? So there's a number of ways you can approach it. They didn't approach it any of those ways. They simply said, let's have a regular waiver, and they voted, and they only got 57 of the 60 that they needed. I have read somewhere, and I thought I still have to dig it up, that it might be the case that that overrule, or rather agreeing with the even agreeing with or tabling the motion to appeal or the point of order, or disagreeing with the parliamentarian and ruling the other way from the chair, where the Byrd rule is concerned, in some cases may still require 60 votes, but I think there's a way to engineer it around that too. Like, I think that's where they would be tabling the appeal instead. But at any rate,
they didn't do it. Detailed thing about how you could do it with 50, which isn't worth going into.
It's very interesting, but
it's fascinating.
We're not there. When it happens, we can explain it. We have, some backgrounder now will make it possible for you to understand it ahead of time, and that's good. But lots of complaints. And that's exactly
what happened. And part of the reason I'm bringing this up is because I didn't think it was going to be anything but a theoretical discussion. And it turned out there it was on the floor.
Yeah.
And what I thought was going to be the dramatic vote of the day. And, of course, that turned out not to be the case because Kyrsten Sinema had to have her day in court, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so things were sailing along and the bill was going to finally pass. And then she decided that she was going to what happened here is because Chuck Schumer was right and the caucus is so divided, at least it's so spread out. Big tent means that one end of the tent pole and the other end of the tent pole are like California, New York. So it's so big, spread out, you really have to work hard to keep your caucus together.
Yeah.
So they all signed a blood oath that they would not allow any amendments whatsoever, even their own.
Right.
Even ones they liked.
That brought
because if they did, they would wind up losing Manchin or Sinema's vote, and they knew they couldn't afford to do that.
Very likely true.
So even Bernie would bring up an amendment that he knew that in their heart of hearts the Republicans would vote no, but he thought that the Democrats might vote yes on at least a little. He brought up at least 4 of them, and they were getting like 199 votes. One vote from Bernie and 99 from everybody else. And the Democrats would stand up and say, I advise you to vote no on this, not because in our heart of hearts we don't think it's a good amendment, but basically not now, Bernie. And then Lindsey Graham would stand up and laugh and say, I want to speak out in opposition to this amendment, but I don't really know if I should. I should just let my colleagues across the aisle fight with each other, and I'll just sit down. And it was a lot of theater. It was a lot of performative stuff. It didn't matter. And they kept that throughout the entire marathon, 24 hours, until the second to last amendment. And in the second to last amendment, John Thune convinced Kyrsten Sinema that, there was some language in the bill that she probably wouldn't like because it's not exactly what she thought was there when it came to carried interest and pretending that she was voting for the people, but in fact she was voting for the hedge funds.
Yes.
And so she agreed with Thune's amendment, and it turned out a bunch of Democrats, knowing it was going to pass, signed on anyway, people who were running for re-election like Warnock, and so it got 57 votes, enough to pass. And that was only done because they scrambled, but not really that hard, to find a different pay-for that would satisfy the requirements of getting the bill passed. And they found one because the finance people's staffers had like 7 or 8 different ways of paying for stuff in their back pocket they didn't need. And they were able to pull out at the last minute, literally the last minute, let's just do this one instead. Instead of having some obscure thing that you don't even know what it is expired this year, we'll have it expire in 2 years. That saves us a bunch of money, gets us right back to where we were. We'll do that. Sinema said yes. Manchin said yes. Bernie said yes. And that last amendment, I think, was the only one that was going to save the bill. That turned out to be a 50-50 vote in which Kamala Harris cast a deciding vote. All the other 50-50 amendments failed.
Yes.
Not because the vice president ruled no, but it's an option. She doesn't have to rule in every 50-50 vote, and we saw a ton of them. But the one 50-50 vote that mattered, that the Democrats wanted to pass, she sat down and said, okay, 51-50. That passed, and then therefore she was still, right there when they passed the actual bill 51-50.
Okay.
So that part was a little bit of drama that nobody saw coming because they didn't think that Sinema was going to screw up the works in the last 2 seconds.
Oh, yes, they did.
Well,
but not exactly.
Nobody saw that coming.
Not that in particular.
They had that fix in their back pocket, and so it didn't really turn out to be anything, and nobody's really going to remember it. The thing that they're going to remember is the bill passed, and the Republicans voted against insulin.
Yes, well, that's what will be emphasized. Certainly, if you had
And that's
asked,
what all the headlines said. You
Yeah.
know, somebody said, no, they're going to blame the Senate. But, you know, I
No.
pulled out immediately, like there was 8 headlines. You could immediately Google Republicans vote against insulin.
All right, well,
Right? There's your
that
campaign,
will be,
folks. Go and run on it.
popularist kind of thing to do. Yeah, I suppose if you had told me I'm from the future and somebody breaks ranks and screws something up right at the last second and they have to scramble to fix it, who did it? I'd have said Kirsten Sinema.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But,
or Manchin, you know, and you would have been
I
right.
would have said Sinema.
But nobody's going to remember that tomorrow. All they're going to remember is that it passed and the Republicans voted against insulin.
Yeah. I was astounded watching the actual response to the senators talking about this agreement to vote against all amendments, unless you're Kirsten Sinema and you find something that's just uncomfortable at the last minute. But it was really interesting watching. I saw a tweet from Brian Schatz talking about this, and the responses were really informative. I'll put them in the roundup, but he just says what you said. We have a deal to pass this bill, as he says, the biggest climate action in U.S. history. Every Senate Dem has agreed to it. I can think of lots of ways to strengthen it, but I won't derail this bill by supporting changes. I'll vote no on all amendments, even for stuff I like. Let's finish the job. Great. You know, I understand why that works that way. And then a comment thread full of, yeah, but you would vote yes on this, right? Wouldn't you? You're not going to abandon your support for this, that, the other thing. You know, some of them very important. Other people like outrage. But you said you would support subsidies for e-bike purchases. Yeah, I'm going to have to sacrifice that one today. We'll come back around to that one. And then some larger, perhaps more important ones. But yeah, it was real interesting just watching him and waiting for him to say, I don't understand what you don't understand here. But he was very gracious about it. He just let the
Well, you know, as Ted Kennedy used to say, half a loaf, take it today, come back and get the other half tomorrow.
Pretty much. It was really interesting, and it was interesting to see people not really get that. And, well, what can you do? People are passionate about these things. So, okay, we'll be back in 2 minutes and continue the rest unless we all have to vote no on everything, even if we want to continue. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I was just looking over my a few saved notes that I do have about people pressuring the various senators, and especially in this case Brian Schatz, who had tweeted his stance, and they really were needling him for, but couldn't you just sneak the e-bike thing in there? I think somebody else thought, maybe if conditions are right, you can legalize marijuana federally, just sort of while no one's looking, throw that in there.
Right. Well, let me give you a real-time example. Again, we have Twitter for this to thank, of how this discussion was going. Brian Metzger, who is a reporter covering Capitol Hill, said, quote, Senate Republicans block $35 insulin price cap, end quote, is the headline they'll get out of this. And somebody following me when I retweeted that said, no, it'll read Senate blocks $35 insulin price cap, figuring, Democrats always lose. And so I started tweeting, actual examples. Kyle Griffin, breaking Senate Republicans have just blocked the $35 per month insulin price cap for Americans. And then after that, it was, I think, the Washington Post, who had a very similar headline, Senate Republicans block insulin cap. And so everybody picked up on Senate Republicans, and they emphasized Republicans block the insulin cap. So, that's the way it's going to go. And that like 5 minutes after that vote, I already saw people running against people like Ron Johnson and Marco Rubio, who was complaining about having to work weekends. You voted against insulin.
Yep.
And in Florida, that's a big deal because like everybody's over 85 in Florida, of all the different places, to vote against insulin. Now, yeah, it's going to be covered by Medicare, but everybody's aware of that. Everybody's aware of what the Republicans are doing, even if they have no idea what else is in the bill. They'll know that.
Yeah. Well, good. They should. And I'm glad to see that there were some favorable headlines that said the right thing, right away. That's good news. That's not always the case.
Well, it's been a good week for Democrats. I mean, any way you slice it, with the different bills that passed and the taking out of Zohari. And, Biden's just had a very good week. Gas prices coming down, inflation coming down a little bit. The polls are looking up in terms of what's going on for Democrats. That's part and parcel of it, too. I'm going to cover that a little bit. But before I want to get to that, I want to finish up with Alex Jones, because there's some really interesting stuff going on there. This one is from somebody you may know on Twitter as Popehad.
Yeah.
His name is Ken White. Very interesting guy, conservative lawyer, but pretty straightforward. And he has a lawyer take on the Alex Jones trial, which I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
It's Alex Jones at the Tower of Babel, when different languages collide in court. And what he says is when modern American political culture winds up in court, the effects are similar. The participants are speaking different languages and using language in different ways. Courts are focused on taxonomy of words. Are they factual? Are they opinion? Are they literal? Are they figurative? Courts care about the literal truth of words, and that's central to defamation law because it's not defamatory unless it's false.
Yes. Okay.
So, right? So if I call somebody an overweight jerk, it's not defamatory if it turns out they are overweight and they're a jerk.
Oh, all right.
Right?
Yeah,
if they're slim and wonderful people, then, that's defamatory.
Over the weight of something, right?
Courts are about analysis, and the entire project of the law is about words meaning specific things. But modern American political culture is emotive and artistic. It uses language like a musician uses notes or an impressionist uses brushstrokes. So whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about Bill Gates' efforts to colonize our bowels through Peachtree dishes, or Alex Jones ranting about gay frogs, modern politicians and pundits use language to convey feelings, attitudes, values, not specific meaning. So if you demand Alex Jones defend the specific meaning of his words, it's like demanding your 8-year-old defend the statement that his birthday party was the best day ever, but he had already said that about Disneyland. So how can both be true?
Well, I have you there, kid.
Right? Trump was the Salvador Dali of the movement. His speech is full of melting clocks of ire and resentment. And Ken White says, I'm offering a descriptive observation, not a positive normative judgment. So the point is, courts are ill-equipped to deal with people like Alex Jones, and people like Alex Jones are ill-equipped to deal with courts. And that's what we saw when Jones was on the stand. Right? The lawyer would start asking a question. You told me one thing, and it turns out not to be true, and I have your texts that show that you lied to me. Do you know what perjury is, Mr. Jones? And Jones's response was, a Perry Mason moment.
Yes, right.
Right? That was actually a very good response because, that captures what's going on here. But, when you start to try to pin down Alex Jones about what the truth really is, his answer was Hillary Clinton. And honest to goodness, it was. He said that on the stand. And the lawyer said, what are you talking about? But the Alex Jones followers, they know exactly what he's talking about.
Yes.
He's bringing up something that makes people mad and will side with him that has nothing to do with facts, but that's what he does. It doesn't work in a court of law. He lost a judgment, $45 million. But, and the first of several, because there's going to be more, because there's other trials coming up, and I got to follow up on that too. But nonetheless, what he's doing and what the court's doing are just so different. It's just so weird to see the juxtaposition there. So it's fit, Ken White writes, that Alex Jones is held accountable for the impact of his words.
And
Defamation cases like this one are just, and it's just that the victims receive compensation, but they don't solve the problem. America can survive the demagogues. It's their audience that's going to kill us.
Well, with something we learned earlier on with sovereign citizens, they have the same problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to watch, except it's also a little sad. And you're
going to get your comeuppance. Mm-hmm. Yes, but what I say here when I go and represent myself and then I rant and I rave is I'm reaching the audience who feels the way I do. Yeah, but this is a court of law and you can't do that.
Right.
Well, but I'm saying that there is no court of law and my feelings supersede your facts.
Yeah, pretty much. They love to do that and just pretend they're going to get away with it. And sometimes they don't get all that's really coming to them, and that's disappointing too. But,
sometimes they do. It just takes a while.
So he's out of pocket on this. I guess now we find out exactly how difficult it is to get $45 million out of people who refuse to comply with courts.
Well, then he goes to bankruptcy court, and he'll have to explain there. And they have a very different way of looking at it now that they have a lot of his records that he was trying to hide.
Yes, that was not helpful to his case. And so we'll see. We'll watch and wait and observe him make his way through bankruptcy as well. That
and
was
other
another
things.
thing.
This is Reuters. Just a summary here. Very good summary.
You can't just
Here are some of the
declare
other
it.
legal challenges Jones and his company now face.
All right.
Jones faces a separate trial over damages in the same Austin court for defaming the family of another victim.
Yes.
His lawyer said Friday the case is on pause due to his company's bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
Jones is due to stand trial to decide damages in a different case in Waterbury, Connecticut, after he was found liable by default judgment for defaming families of several Sandy Hook victims. Some of those families, that's the medical records that turned up on Jones's phone / computer from his lawyer.
Right.
They weren't supposed to have those. Jones certainly wasn't supposed to have those. How he had them is part of the deal that is causing Jones's lawyers to be called into Connecticut to explain themselves in front of the court.
Yes.
So that's a different thing. Texas bankruptcy. In the bankruptcy case, Sandy Hook parents told the Houston judge, different than the Austin judge, that Jones might continue to draw money from Free Speech Systems, the parent company of his far-right InfoWars website. The families have said Jones took $62 million from Free Speech while burdening it with $65 million in fabricated debt.
Yeah.
They said the bankruptcy court shouldn't allow Free Speech to send money to Jones until they've an opportunity to get to the bottom of the finances. And, of course, all the information they just got will help with this. There's a possible perjury charge. And they're looking at that in Austin. Attorney repercussions. The judge in the Connecticut case on Thursday ordered Jones's attorney and another lawyer for Jones, the one in Connecticut, to appear for hearings this month on whether they should face sanctions for the unauthorized release of the plaintiff's medical information. That's the Connecticut plaintiffs, apparently in reference to the disclosure of Jones's records in Texas. U.S. Capitol attack fallout. The disclosure could also have implications there because the records then go on to the January 6th committee. And the judge in Austin said, I'm not going to stand in the way of that. They certainly could have those records. So Jones doesn't get away with everything just because he can bloviate and gish gallop on the stand. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, many things he's learning don't work that way, including that people will the courts will consider you to be in bankruptcy because you have quote unquote declared bankruptcy. Like, you don't go to the corner and say, I think there's a comic bit somewhere about someone just saying, I declare bankruptcy. Now, there's a whole court proceeding that goes along with that too, and you're not in bankruptcy until they agree that you're in bankruptcy, and they haven't yet. You can't just say you're bankrupt and then get out of paying things. But, and remember, we're only here in in a lot of these cases because of the default judgment against him. That comes from declining to appear in court because you don't recognize this court's jurisdiction over you as a free American. And then,
right.
Guess
I mean,
what?
he's basically
They say,
trying the Mary
"You lose."
Tyler Moore defense, right?
Oh,
yeah, Judge, you think you can take my money? Well, I'm fired. There.
All right.
Now what are you going to do?
Now I have no money. I lose.
Now I have no money, no job.
Yeah.
I'm done. Okay, you can't have what I don't have anymore. Well, no, it doesn't work that way at all. So he'll find that out.
Yep.
So
Soon, I hope.
this next item comes in response. This is from Terry Canfield, a former appellate defender and book writer and Washington Post an analyst. Joyce Vance, also a legal analyst,
Okay.
had written about our previous discussion about insulin and Republicans.
Yeah.
And says, I don't understand the willingness of Senate Republicans to ruin the lives of people who voted for them in order to own the libs.
Oh, well.
Just a generic statement.
All right.
And Terry Canfield said, I think I do understand it. Let me give it a shot.
All right. Let's hear it.
And I thought this whole thing was really interesting. It has to do, she said, with the purpose of government.
Oh.
For some people like us, the purpose of government is to help people. We think fairness is possible and that the government's job is to try to create fairness.
Yes.
See, but others have a very different worldview.
That seems true.
Hierarchy people think there's a natural order. Some people belong on top, other people belong on the bottom. And they think people with money and power have that money and power because they deserve it. Right?
Yeah.
It's the prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
An example, the white supremacy theories that informed the Confederacy. Hierarchy people didn't believe equality was possible because they didn't believe people are equal. They think the purpose of government is to allocate power and maintain hierarchy. So when a government helps people, they think the government's taking away from the makers and giving it to the underserving. They're going galt, you know?
Yeah.
When people lower them on the hierarchy, demand equality, they think those people want to replace them. 19th century America was a strict hierarchy, specifically a patriarchy, with white men at the top, black women at the bottom. White women were kept out of the professions, which kept them dependent on men, which gave men control. And 19th century laws reinforced the hierarchy. And she brings up something she happens to be an expert on, rape laws. She says they're designed to protect white men from false accusations. They have nothing to do with protecting women from anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you mean.
She said, I won't go into the details of rape laws, but you get the idea. I'll add, though, that the laws were based on the idea that men were natural aggressors and the women's job was to guard the good. Then came along the civil rights and women's rights movements, and the patriarchy was, challenged, smashed, however you're calling it, and we're still riding the backlash.
Yeah.
So the current GOP wants to go back to the good old days of the patriarchy, and that's why they want to outlaw abortion, make medicine expensive, dismantle the regulatory agencies. If you take the long view of history, we basically lived in patriarchy the entire time. It's only really brief window that things were better, and that rapid change has unsettled some people, and they really think the liberals are destroying everything good about America. And now I've written my blog post for next week, so I hope you read it.
Okay. Yeah, well, I've seen
So
other
you look at
takes.
the Republicans. You look at Mitt Romney, and remember that Bain picture with him having money coming out of his mouth and hands and everything, all his buddies had $1, everywhere, every pocket, every
sticking
hand.
out, yeah. Couldn't contain all the cash that they had.
Right?
Yeah.
So they think the laws are for them, and you're disrupting that, and so they're going to vote no. And those are the people who sponsor them and Kirsten Sinema. And so they're going to vote that way. How can Kirsten Sinema possibly think that what she's doing is good for people? Well, it's good for the people who, are sponsoring her.
Yes, there's always that. And then there's...
Just happened to be egregious because she's not that good at it. She's not the best politician. She doesn't hide it the way Mitch McConnell does.
That's true. And she's not as skilled at that. And then there's always Adam Serwer's own formulation of it, that the cruelty is the point of what they're doing.
Yeah, and part of the reason is to keep the hierarchy.
Yeah.
I mean, it all fits in there to that model. So the cruelty, you're cruel to the people not on the same plane as you. You're cruel to people below you.
Yes.
To keep them there.
Right. And it's part of what powers their movement. For whatever reason, people are really interested in paying, I guess, into that system, perhaps in the hope of, they're screwing me and things are terrible for me, but they're worse for the other guys. And so relatively speaking, I'm doing better. So I'll just keep paying for it. But yeah, That's a very big divide between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats who still believe that the government can and should be leveraged to do good things and help people, and Republicans really view government as an instrument of pain that they want to inflict on others. As opposed to
in that context,
just less good
the
for
vote
them.
makes sense.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
Okay, I'm in agreement with that. I think generally.
Professor Samuel Perry, sociologist who studies religion, had a post on Twitter, which I thought was very interesting. An article in Human Behavior, which is a nature journal.
Oh, all right. Sounds natural enough.
A credible, science journal.
Oh, one of those.
Changes in Americans' prejudices during the presidency of Donald Trump. And Samuel Perry writes, did Trump's norm-violating rhetoric regarding racial and religious minorities increase prejudice during his presidency? A hard yes. The authors of this piece conducted 13 studies showing religious and racial prejudice increased under this presidency, but only among his supporters.
Yeah, all right. Well, I mean, it's good that it's contained to his supporters. It's sad that there are any.
Right. Exactly. So,
all right. I mean, that's
a lot going on. Now, Ali Vitali writes, new this morning, this is yesterday, a non-reconciliation piece of news.
What?
In a memo to campaigns and allies, the DCCC says internal polls in 20-plus frontline and target districts shows GOP attacks on access to abortion register as the top testing negative since the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision. The DCCC says they're also seeing voters of color side with abortion access regardless of personal, cultural, or religious beliefs, the Kansas sort of finding.
All right.
Doesn't matter how you think about it. And remember, Americans support Roe. They support the compromise with complex restrictions.
All right. Yes, I believe
they support the status quo. That's what they didn't want overturned. I may or may not agree with abortion personally, but I want to make sure that those who need access can have access, basically, so that women don't die, which is not an exaggeration and not hyperbole.
Yeah, and I think they were more comfortable even if they opposed abortion personally and might opt not to have one if they found themselves in the same circumstances, maybe. But maybe they would. But what they really want is relief from terrible headlines that remind them of the awful things that can happen if you say no across the board.
So Simon Rosenberg, who you know, is one of the most optimistic about Democratic chances in the fall. Even 538 is now saying, based on polling alone plus their model, which is basically putting their finger on the scale, they figure that the Democrats have about a 65% chance of keeping the Senate, which is pretty good, based on poll alone.
Better than it was.
Better than it was. So Simon Rosenberg says, I've updated my core election analysis, and remember, he's the most optimistic of optimists. The race has moved 4 to 5 points towards the Democrats. Senate leaning D, chance of keeping House is rising. A lot of signs of Republican struggles, landscape likely to get better for Democrats. And the Democrats also have a big cash advantage. And I would add, by the way, they also get to run against Republicans refuse to grant you the ability to buy insulin at a reasonable price.
Yes.
Here's what Republicans are seeing. 4 influential GOP polls have Democrats up average of 4.5 points. 3 others show Democrats gaining 6 points in recent weeks. McConnell admits on camera Democrats may keep the Senate. And then he provides the data for that. Has a great discussion with Dave Katniss, who's a conservative political commentator, about a fair one, though. I mean, but he leans conservative.
Really?
About the rising chances Democrats can keep both House and Congress this year. And he says this is acting statistically more like a Democratic wave election than a Republican wave election. And he also sat down with other people, Maria Cardona and her for a pod for an in-depth discussion of how it's slipping away from the Republicans. So the Biden boom keeps booming. Healthcare is now better and less expensive. Gun safety steps have been taken. Historic climate legislation has passed. Gas prices are going down. Inflation is moderating. And then he cites a Politico piece, meet the most optimistic Democrat online. That would be Simon Rosenberg. And sure, it may be optimistic, but there's a lot of truth in what he's saying. I think everybody agrees that things are moving in the proper direction if you're a Democrat.
The trends are
and
true.
It's not over, so there's still time. And, of course, it is the summer when people aren't totally focused. And what we do know, on the one hand, is that people really don't like Republicans. The problem for Democrats is that doesn't automatically mean that they like Democrats. I'm going to give you an example, and that's Wisconsin.
It's non-binary, man.
Well, I'll say at the outset, we do have a secret weapon in Wisconsin.
Okay.
And that is Ben Wickler and Wisconsin Democrats, who happen to be a really competent crew. It's really helpful to do that. Can't say that, let's say, about Florida. You know, I can't sing the praises of the Florida Democratic Party because they pull things out of their hat and, you know, get everything organized. But in Wisconsin, they do. That's why there's a Democratic governor right now. There's a Republican legislature.
Etc.
So here's a piece by Michelle Cottle in the New York Times. Why is Ron Johnson still competitive despite, you know, everything?
Well, 6-year terms. But okay, yeah.
Well, he's running.
Right.
And so he's awful, and people don't like him.
Oh.
And Charlie Sykes and Sarah Longwell had a focus group about this, too. Charlie Sykes is from Wisconsin, knows Wisconsin well. And there's no question that people are disaffected. They don't like Johnson. They don't like what he's doing. They think he's extremist. They don't particularly care for his role and involvement in January 6th. And they certainly don't like what he's doing in terms of suggesting Medicare and Medicaid should go away or voting against insulin.
Yeah.
But Johnson, on the one hand, has had the ability, like Glenn Youngkin, of taking extremist views and cloaking them in moderate terms. So that's one of the things about Johnson. Interestingly, the last time he ran, people still said they didn't know that much about him. Everybody knows about him now, and they don't like him. Oh. So he's definitely vulnerable. But the Democrats are going to likely vote to run against him, a fellow named Mandela Barnes, who's a really likable, engaging progressive.
All right.
And so there's going to be a ton of Mandela Barnes supported Black Lives Matter and the burning of Kenosha ads coming from the National Party.
Yes, burnt.
So the question on the table is, we know we don't like Johnson. Can Mandela Barnes make inroads in moderate and independent voters, which is what he's going to need in order to be able to win? He might be able to. He's very engaging. He's running a good campaign so far, but there's going to be a ton of negative advertising that are going to try to tie him to burning down of various places. And whereas Republicans think that whenever they see a burned out building, they're looking at New York City or D.C. or Chicago, that actually happened in Wisconsin. So there's material there for the Republicans to use, and that's the worry.
Some. Right. It's there's still a city there, as it turns out. It wasn't burnt to the ground and the soil salted afterwards. But, yes, there's more evidence of there having been destruction there than there is in virtually any other of these places.
Conservative Charlie Sykes' point is people still remember that in Wisconsin.
I see.
You know, he's from Wisconsin. He's of Wisconsin. And he said those images still, you know, evoke, bad feelings.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see. I'm curious to see how the advertising goes, how the election goes, how, trial footage of Kyle Rittenhouse crying plays and who responds to it in which ways. There's still going to be people who are like, still remember, you probably just shouldn't just bring guns and shoot everybody. But then there will be others in Wisconsin who say, yeah, we should. Absolutely.
Right. So here's the way Michelle Cottle puts it. Once the primaries are done, and they're going to be done quite soon, the Republicans' attack on Mr. Barnes is expected to be swift and brutal. In strategic terms, the race may essentially boil down to the question whether Mr. Johnson can moderate his MAGA crazy more successfully than Mr. Barnes can moderate ultra-woke views. But the bigger, more existential question for Wisconsin is that they want to spend another 6 years being repped by a conspiracy-peddling, vaccine-trashing, climate change-mocking, election-doubting, Social Security and Medicare-threatening MAGA mad dog. And, that's what it's going to come down to. And Johnson can't just define himself as a nice guy who goes to, charity camps and helps people.
Charity camps.
That's not what Ron Johnson does. Well, he ran on that.
Ah, okay. Camps. I didn't realize. Maybe, I don't know. He's got the name for it. Ron Johnson. He's nobody in particular.
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas they will say, it does lend itself to that campaign of ultra woke. His name is Mandela.
Right.
Yeah, but Mandela was kind of a hero. Yeah, but not to me because I'm a racist. Oh, well.
This is from March of
But
2022. Senator Ron Johnson launches new ads highlighting faith-based project that connects people to job opportunities called the Joseph Project. How he helps unemployment rates in Milwaukee neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think everybody believes that.
Yeah, I like to build up Milwaukee. They want to burn it down. That kind of thing. That's what's coming. Just,
Does it even
so
exist?
People are aware.
Milwaukee?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I thought it was that too was burnt to the ground almost assuredly, as all major cities in the United States were. Everyone knows this,
right? But again, that's what's coming. Just so people know.
Well, yeah, I think yes, everyone should probably know and knows by now that that's what's coming. And I think he knew when he signed up that was coming. But what are you going to do? You can't run away and say, yeah.
Well, you can run away. I mean, one of the other themes that you're going to see, I think, and Doug Mastriano has highlighted it in Pennsylvania, is that Republicans will refuse to talk to reporters. They'll only have Fox News and their own people there. Yes. So, yeah, they can run away.
Okay, yeah, no, I was thinking about us running away. Like, we can't we can't run away from running against people like Ron Johnson because, they say nasty things. But that doesn't make any sense. But, they can run away from reporters. Yeah, okay, that's a different running. He's definitely doing that. He's running, as they love to say. So, and the answer, the rest of the sentence is away from the press.
Right.
Yep.
And, we got a couple more things to cover, but it's the end of the hour, so we'll save it for Wednesday.
Okay. Well, we can always do that. We got a couple more shots at it. Yeah, Mastriano has some press representatives who are even further right crazy than he is and have said such fun things as we won't talk to anybody who's not Christian, which is kind of used to be net negative in elections in this country, but now I don't know, among MAGA types, that's a signal to one another. This is the kind of guy we want. He'll only talk to Christian reporters, and even then he probably won't talk to them if they are from a different outlet. It's really true. All right, thanks, Greg. We'll catch up with you again on Wednesday, and I'll check your notes that you're sending me at the end of this thing too. Talk to you again soon. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll check in again, as Greg said, with him on Wednesday. He sends me this note on his way out the door, marveling at the reporting or the tweeting of the reporters at the New York Times who carry, I guess, somebody else's new book excerpts that inform us that Donald Trump, as they tweeted, told his top White House aide, and I guess we're talking about Mark Meadows here, that he wished he had generals like the ones who had reported to Adolf Hitler. That sounds pretty good. Saying they were, quote, totally loyal to the leader of the Nazi regime, according to a forthcoming book about the former president. And we'll read about it, but yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's basically, where are my generals? Why won't they just do the things that I say and not pay any attention to the Constitution or their oaths of office or what's good for the military or good for the country? They should just do what I say. And I think one or two of them actually did do that, and they actually really regretted it. That's, I think, captured in the book. Although I have seen other people say similar things like, yeah, why couldn't there have been generals like Adolf Hitler had, like the ones who tried to assassinate him? Why didn't we have any of those? And the answer is because we're exceptional in this country. American exceptionalism is what prevented us from disposing of Donald Trump's body in the ocean like Osama bin Laden. You see, we believe in the rule of law here, which means it will take us a really, 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 really long time to come around to the point where part of the country finally understands that he was criminal and is totally discredited, but some 25 to 35% of the country continues believing that he was really awesome. And even if we get to the point where we punish him and put him in jail or prevent him from running for office, in about 15 years or so, these 35%, 25 to 35% of hardcore Trump supporters will have softened views of everyone else, and even if they continue to acknowledge that Donald Trump was a bad person, they will elect a ideological successor to him about 15 years down the road. That's about how long it takes for America to forget how bad things were and elect somebody else who's as bad or worse. That's just been our historical trend. All right, let's see. The article that Greg sent us here, the one that links from the New York Times' tweet, Trump asked aide why his generals couldn't be like Hitler's. Book says, again, a book revealing the truth a year and a half after the reality. Mr. Trump once asked his chief of staff why his military leadership couldn't be more like German generals who had reported to Adolf Hitler, according to an excerpt. And the answer is, we're America, but, trying to get that through Donald Trump's head is lost cause. Michael Shear is the author of the column, which is about somebody else's book. And I think it's Peter Baker. So that'll thrill all of you. Former President Donald J. Trump told his top White House aide that he wished his generals, you know what he wished already. We've heard this 100 times just in the prep of reading this article. Why can't you be like the German generals? Mr. Trump told John Kelly, or more accurately, why can't you be more like the German generals? He's speaking here to John Kelly, his then chief of staff, one of, how many did he have? 4, 5? All right. Preceding the question with an obscenity, of course. So I'm sure the obscenity is set up here somewhere, but they're just leaving it out. So we could use any obscenity and in any context. Like, why am I such a idiot? Now I want to know why you can't be like the German generals. I doubt that was the obscenity, but, well, at any rate. Mr. Trump told John Kelly, his chief of staff, preceding the question with an obscenity, according to an excerpt from, and here's all the sales information, The Divider, Trump in the White House by Peter Baker and Susan Glasser, published online by The New Yorker on Monday morning. How do you like that? So it's excerpts from The New Yorker. So what? Peter Baker writes for The New York Times, gets paid by them, is writing the book, and will get paid by the publisher there, and is getting paid again by The New Yorker, publishing excerpts from the book online. And that's interesting because usually I always thought the deal was that somehow, I guess the publishers weren't always the New York Times, but the New York Times would somehow benefit again from his having saved all the juicy bits for his book by, well, I guess here's the article. But usually they're the exclusive outlet for the excerpts as well. The fact that it's happening at the New Yorker is new and unusual, I think. The excerpt depicts Mr. Trump as deeply frustrated by his top military officials, whom he saw as insufficiently loyal or obedient to him. That is to say, doing things the right way. In the conversation with Mr. Kelly, which took place years before an attack on the Capitol on January 6th, the authors write, the chief of staff told Trump that Germany's generals had, quote, tried to kill Hitler 3 times and almost pulled it off. So they actually said that? That's interesting. I wonder if that even registered with him. Mr. Trump was dismissive, according to the excerpt, apparently unaware of the World War II history that Mr. Kelly, a retired 4-star general, knew all too well. No, they were totally loyal to him, the president replied. According to the book's authors, in his version of history, the generals of the Third Reich had been completely subservient to Hitler. This was the model he wanted for his military. Kelly told Trump that there were no such American generals, but the president was determined to test the proposition. Much of the excerpt focuses on General Mark Milley, who served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the country's top military official, under Trump. When the president offered him the job, General Milley told him, "I'll do whatever you ask me to do." But he quickly soured on the president. And I don't know, Milley may have meant, I don't know how he could have not understood that he would eventually be asked to do something that he would consider inappropriate or illegal. But his excuse for saying something like that might have been, well, the military is subservient to the civilian leadership here. You're the commander in chief, and I'll execute your orders, minus the illegal ones. I mean, he may have thought in his head, but I don't know. Maybe for no other president, you should say that caveat out loud for Donald Trump. He really just does not understand that to be the case. General Milley's frustration with the president peaked on June 1st, 2020, when Black Lives Matter protesters filled Lafayette Square near the White House. Trump demanded to send in the military to clear the protesters, but General Milley and other top aides refused. In response, Trump shouted, "You're all losers," according to the excerpt. Turning to Milley, Trump said, "Can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something," the authors write. And I'm sure it must have occurred to General Milley at that point, and I guess we're all supposed to be glad that he decided not to do this, because a military coup is no joke and it's no fun, but that he probably was considering, I'm going to shoot you in the legs just to be rid of you for a while and then see how you like it. See if you think that's fair use of the military. I mean, that might have taught a lesson, but probably not the one that he thought. Anyway, after the square was cleared by the National Guard and police, General Milley briefly joined the president, that's really inexplicable, and the other aides in walking through the empty park so Trump could be photographed in front of the church on the other side. Authors said General Milley later considered the decision to join the president to be a misjudgment that would haunt him forever, a road to Damascus moment, as he would later put it. And I mean, if you're really in the middle of having that debate with the president, and why can't you shoot them? And why don't you use the military to clear the square? And you have that disagreement. I don't understand how you do that, really. You have that disagreement. I want you to use the military to shoot the protesters and clear the square. No, we can't do that. Well, now that the square's been cleared, why don't you walk with me across the square? No, I'm not going with you. I'm still mad at you for that discussion we just had. How can that be? But I don't know. I'm not in that position. A week after that incident, General Milley wrote, but never delivered, a scathing resignation letter, apparently, accusing the president he served of politicizing the military, quote, ruining the international order, failing to value diversity, that's, I'm sure, true, and embracing the tyranny, dictatorship, and extremism that members of the military had sworn to fight against. And I guess another quote from that letter, never released until now anyway. "It is my belief that you were doing great and irreparable harm to my country," the general wrote in the letter, which has not been revealed before and was published in its entirety by The New Yorker. General Milley wrote that Mr. Trump did not honor those who had fought against fascism and the Nazis during World War II. He doesn't. He thought they were losers and suckers and, whatever else. Allegedly keeps a copy of Mein Kampf, wants generals to be like Hitler's generals, except, not the real Hitler's generals, but the fictional version of it in which they're totally loyal. He continues in his letter, "It's now obvious to me that you don't understand that world order," General Milley wrote. "You don't understand what the war was all about. In fact, you subscribe to many of the principles that we fought against, and I cannot be a party to that." Except that he decided in the end to be a party to that for the rest of Trump's term in office. But, of course, for the noble cause of fighting against him from the inside. Which, granted, maybe that is an okay decision given, the military is an enormously destructive force. And I suppose you could legitimately worry. And I think I probably would have agreed, now that I think about it on the spot. Like, okay, I understand. You think I should stand up for my principles, et cetera, but what if he does get another general who will do these things? Like, as long as I'm chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I can step in and say, to hell with what the president just told you. That's a totally illegal order. Do not obey it. Whereas somebody else, even if they're just shaky on it, like, I'm not really sure what to do, you could have disaster on your hands. He may be uniquely positioned in all of that. I don't know if I believe that about the Secretary of Agriculture. He could destroy agriculture as we know it. He could. But it's not the same as nuclear weapons. I don't think. I don't know. I'll listen. I'll hear it out. What do you have to say? But okay. General Milley eventually decided to remain in office so he could ensure that the military could serve as a bulwark against an increasingly out-of-control president, which it sort of kind of did. I don't know. According to the authors of the book, "I'll just fight him," General Milley told his staff, according to the New Yorker excerpt. The challenge, as he saw it, was to stop Trump from doing any more damage while also acting in a way that was consistent with his obligation to carry out the orders of his commander-in-chief. "If they want to court-martial me or put me in prison, have at it." All right. In addition to the revelations about General Milley, the book excerpt reveals new details about Trump's interactions with his top military and national security officials and documents dramatic efforts by the former president's most senior aides to prevent a domestic or international crisis in the weeks after Mr. Trump lost his re-election bid. In the summer of 2017, the book excerpt reveals, Trump returned from viewing the Bastille Day parade in Paris and told Mr. Kelly that he wanted one of his own. I think we all remember that. But the president told Mr. Kelly, "Look, I don't want any wounded guys in our parade. This doesn't look good for me," the authors write. That's nice. And as you know, Trump was clear about that, right? I like soldiers who don't get wounded, okay? You know, he's said as much. Kelly could not believe what he was hearing. The excerpt continues, "Those are our heroes," he told Trump. "In our society, there's only one group of people who are more heroic than they are, and they are buried over in Arlington." Trump answered, "I don't want them. It doesn't look good for me," according to the authors. The excerpt underscores how many of the president's senior aides have been trying to burnish their reputations in the wake of the January 6th attack. Like General Milley, who largely refrained from criticizing Trump publicly, they're now eager to make their disagreements with him clear by cooperating with book authors and other journalists. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who never publicly disputed Trump's wild election claims and has rarely criticized him since, was privately dismissive of the assertions of fraud that Trump and his advisors embraced. On the evening of November 9th, 2020, after the news media called the race for Joe Biden, Pompeo called General Milley and asked to see him, according to the excerpt. During a conversation at Milley's kitchen table, Pompeo was blunt about what he thought of the people around the president. "The crazies have taken over," Pompeo told General Milley, according to the authors. Behind the scenes, they write, Pompeo had quickly accepted that the election was over and refused to promote overturning it. He was totally against it, sure. A senior State Department official recalled, Pompeo cynically justified this jarring contrast between what he said in public and in private. It was important for him to not get fired at the end, too, to be there to the bitter end, the senior official said, according to the excerpt, but there's less explanation for why that's important to the rest of us, and the reality is it might not have been. Certainly not in the same way as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. The authors detail what they call an extraordinary arrangement in the weeks after the election between Pompeo and Milley to hold daily morning phone calls with Mark Meadows, the White House Chief of Staff, in an effort to make sure the president did not take dangerous actions. Pompeo and Milley soon took to calling them the land the plane phone calls, the authors write. Our job is to land this plane safely and to do a peaceful transfer of power on the 20th of January. Well, failure in that respect. Milley told his staff, "This is our obligation to the nation. There was a problem, however. Both engines are out, the landing gear are stuck, and we're in an emergency situation." The January 6th hearings on Capitol Hill have revealed that a number of the former president's top aides pushed back privately against Trump's election denials, even as some declined to do so publicly. Several, including Patsy Baloney, as we like to call him, the former White House counsel, testified that they had attempted without success to convince the president that there was no evidence of substantial fraud. In the excerpt, the authors say that General Milley concluded that Cipollone was a force for trying to keep the guardrails around the president. The general also believed that Mr. Pompeo was genuinely trying to achieve a peaceful handover of power, the authors write, but they write that General Milley was never sure what to make of Meadows. It was the chief of staff trying to land the plane or hijack it. General Milley is not the only top official who considered resignation. the authors write, in response to the president's actions. The excerpt details private conversations among the president's national security team as they discussed what to do in the event the president attempted to take actions they felt they could not abide. The authors report that General Milley consulted with Robert Gates, a former Secretary of Defense and former head of the CIA. The advice from Gates was blunt. The authors write, keep the chiefs on board with you and make it clear to the White House that if you go, they all go, so the White House knows that this isn't just about firing Mark Milley, this is about the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff quitting in the response. The excerpt makes clear that Trump did not always get the yes men that he wanted. During one Oval Office exchange, Trump asked General Paul Selva, an Air Force officer and the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what he thought about the president's desire for a military parade through the nation's capital on the 4th of July. General Selva's response, which has not been reported before, was blunt and not what the president wanted to hear, according to the book's authors. I didn't grow up in the United States. I actually grew up in Portugal, General Selva said. Portugal was a dictatorship, and parades were about showing the people who had the guns. And in this country, we don't do that, he added. It's not who we are. Ooh, that's an interesting angle on it that I never considered, and that probably wouldn't have worked with Trump supporters. But, Trump supporters are so fond of their guns, and so fond of their guns in particular because they believe in the insurrectionist theory of the Second Amendment, as Jamie Raskin terms it, that they are in possessions of guns and in particular of weapons of war for the purpose of keeping the government in check, should it ever turn tyrannical. And Trump, of course, loves to trumpet his support of their view of gun rights and the Second Amendment, and yet at the same time wants to parade the army through the streets to show everybody who has the really big guns. It's kind of contradictory. And but again, logic will get you nowhere with these guys. So maybe, we just laugh about it privately on little shows like this and chuckle about how dumb and contradictory they are. And they go ahead and do their thing, and there's nothing we can do to stop them. And that's the sad truth of it. All right, let's see. Earlier mentioned by Greg, the story out of Michigan with the Republican, I guess, the nominee designate. He's almost wrapped up the nomination for Attorney General there in Michigan, and yet is caught up in illegal activity surrounding the voting machines after the 2020 election. This, too, brought to my attention earlier in the day by Rebecca Romans, who passed it on as a suggestion for an important story. And I'm in agreement, and we should share this one that she sent along from, I guess it's a Reuters story, but it ran in one of the local Michigan papers. Let me see. In the tweet, it sends us to the Detroit News. But it is, in fact, a Reuters story at bottom. Exclusively Reuters story, I suppose, because that's what it says here. Exclusive, Trump-backed Michigan Attorney General candidate involved in voting system breach documents show by Nathan Lane. Not the famous actor, but the, let's say, we'll call him famous Reuters reporter. Maybe he's brand new. Maybe he is world famous. I don't know. But it would be more fun if it was Nathan Lane, and we could reliably do a Nathan Lane type imitation of him reading I can hear the voice in my head. I don't know if I can translate it into actually speaking it. But all right, that would just be a distraction, don't you think? The Republican nominee for Michigan Attorney General led a team that gained unauthorized access to voting equipment while hunting for, of course, evidence to support former President Donald Trump's false election fraud claims, according to a Reuters analysis of court filings and public records. So what it comes down to here is, of course, Trump lies and says there is massive fraud. He convinces people that there was, and then they commit massive fraud, or at least violate all sorts of election laws, in order to prove that really, truly, the other guys violated those laws, which they didn't. And so now all they have is no evidence of the other guys violating the laws and a mountain of evidence of them violating the laws, but for good reasons in their own heads. But that doesn't really help you ordinarily. So where were we here? Ah, yes. The analysis shows that people working with Matthew DePerno, the Trump-endorsed nominee for the state's top law enforcement post, which is weird, examined a vote tabulator from Richfield Township, a conservative stronghold of 3,600 people in northern Michigan's, oh boy, Roscommon County, maybe? It looks like ROS in front of the word common. So could it be Roscommon or could it be Roscoe, like Roscoe P. Coltrane, but actually Roscoe, Momon, I don't know. Roscommon, I don't know. Someone from the area can certainly fill me in on whether or not if it's anything other than Roscommon, let me know. It could be Roscommon, maybe. I don't know. People would do that with a county name. Okay. Well, I'd love to know, but not as much as I'd love to know about the rest of this article. The Richfield security breach is one of 4 similar incidents being investigated by Michigan's current Attorney General, Democrat Dana Nessel. Under state law, it is a felony to seek or provide unauthorized access to voting equipment. So there you have it. Felony. DePerno did not respond to a request for comment because the request was, what can you tell us about your participation in this felony? The involvement of a Republican Attorney General nominee in a voting system breach comes amid a national effort by backers of Trump's fraud falsehoods to win state offices that could prove critical in deciding any future contested elections. And again, excellent point, but I just want to put an even finer point on it by saying we're about this close to possibly electing not only people who say, well, I'll go along for the ride and say, rhetorically mirror Trump's message and say, oh, there was this terrible fraud and something, blah, blah, blah. But we're actually talking about people who are in position to win, who they themselves will participate in a scheme to seize vote tabulating machines and take them apart and photograph them and hack the data. And it's really getting seriously crazy out there. In Arizona last week, 3 Trump-backed candidates who claimed the 2020 election was stolen won Republican primary elections for governor, attorney general, and secretary of state. That's a trifecta that can have you what would be enough to throw even a revised electoral count act into chaos should they sweep those 3 positions. We're also reminded that in Pennsylvania, Republican gubernatorial nominee Doug Mastriano has vowed to decertify any election he considers fraudulent through his appointed Secretary of State. Michigan, Arizona, and Pennsylvania are all presidential election battlegrounds. Trump lavished praise on DePerno before a large audience this weekend, large-ish, let's say, at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Dallas. He's going to make sure that you are, this is Trump. He's going to make sure that you are going to have law and order and fair elections. Well, we're voting for him so that he doesn't. Because, as you know, in a fair election, we lose. But in a really cool election, we just declare ourselves the winner. That's what we're out here for. So that's what Trump said, pumping his fist as DePerno stood up in the audience and waved. That's an important race. Reuters established the connection between Michigan's DePerno and the Richfield voting system breach by matching the serial number of the township's tabulator to a photograph in a publicly released report written by a member of DePerno's team. You see how this is coming together here? The photograph showed a printed record of a vote tabulator's activity, which also included a string of 10 digits. Reuters confirmed that those numbers matched the serial number of a Richfield vote tabulator through public records obtained from the township. State officials had previously identified Richfield as the site of a voting equipment security breach. DePerno had submitted the report as evidence in a failed lawsuit challenging the 2020 election results in a different Michigan county, Antrim. The report claimed that Dominion and ES&S election equipment was vulnerable to hacking and vote rigging, chiefly because they had been stolen, apparently, from wherever they were being stored, by DePerno and his henchmen. It's odd. Reuters asked an election security expert to review the materials. Kevin Skoglund, president and chief technologist for the nonpartisan Citizens for Better Elections, and you know they're for better elections because it says so right in the name. This is an election security advocacy organization, apparently, said the matching numbers indicate that DePerno's team had access to the Richfield Township tabulator or its data drives. Okay. DePerno led the Michigan Antrim County election lawsuit and investigation team. That's enclosed in quotes there. That's the name of the team, which included himself, Detroit attorney Stephanie Lambert, private investigator Michael Lynch, and James Penrose, a former analyst for the National Security Agency, according to promotional material for a July 2021 fundraising event in California, sponsored by a conservative group that advertised appearances by DePerno's team members. Interesting. We'll see if we can run down the rest of this after this short break. How fascinating and obtuse.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. I was just looking around for some of the tweets I was thinking about earlier, but all right, well, I may have to put those all aside. Let's jump back to the Reuters story and see what more detail there is about what was going on in Michigan. I have a feeling that it will pay to become well-versed in just how far this DePerno character actually went in all of this. We left off by noting that DePerno led the Michigan Antrim County election lawsuit and investigation team, which included these named folks: Detroit attorney Stephanie Lambert, private investigator Michael Lynch, James Penrose, a former analyst for the NSA, according to promotional material from a fundraising event in California, sponsored by a conservative group that advertised appearances of DePerno's team members. I don't know to whom that would have been relevant in California, but I guess that would be exciting news to the conspiracy theorists there. And we're talking, and that's interesting too. The guy running for, now almost securing the nomination for Attorney General in Michigan. And we've had a lot of scare stories about this, and they're all real and they're all true, and you should be scared about the people who've been nominated for these positions. But that guy, if you've never heard of him, and you're just willing to accept, okay, he's crazy. How crazy is he? He's so crazy that in California, the conspiracy theory nuts in California, when they're being asked to part with their money, are willing to give up money to sit around and hear this guy DePerno and his team. And, you could understand perhaps, okay, conspiracy theorists in Michigan will know perhaps who this is, but all the way out in California, they would be willing to pay money up front to hear these guys speak. I guess they were just that well known as conspiracy nuts when it came to the election. Penrose, that's the former NSA analyst, who had assisted other prominent Trump allies in their efforts to overturn the 2020 election results, authored the report that Reuters tied to a tabulator involved in the Richfield Township security breach. Okay, Lambert, Lynch, and Penrose did not respond to requests for comment. The previously unreported link to GOP Attorney General candidate DePerno and his associates comes as Democratic incumbent Nessel advances her probe, which she launched in February of 2022. Nessel is seeking re-election, which would create a conflict of interest if her political opponent became a suspect in her office's investigation. And that's an interesting twist to the whole thing. I mean, there's ways to take care of it. I think, as Greg mentioned, the assistant or deputy attorney general, I don't know what they call them there in Michigan, will step in and run the investigation so that there's no conflict of interest. But it's almost like DePerno calculates, well, they won't really be able to investigate me aggressively because if they do, I will scream that it's a conflict of interest and unfair for them to investigate me given that I'm running against them. And I'm really being persecuted for my political opposition to them, which it might even be true in his mind because his political opposition to them is that they wouldn't, as he would have, cheated in order to install Donald Trump as president, but he believes that Donald Trump was president because there's hidden evidence that I can't find anywhere of massive fraud, and also he's totally better than everybody else on the Constitution because I think so, and I'm saving America, not ruining it by overturning the will of its people as expressed in their vote. He's just convinced he's a patriot. Actually makes me think of something I was reminded of over the weekend. I don't know who was tweeting about it, but reminded of the historical fact that there was a pro-Nazi rally in 1939, right in Madison Square Garden, a big event, and this was before the United States entered the war. And in fact, before the war had officially launched, so it had a launch event, a launch party with Trump vodka at it, before the invasion of Poland, essentially. When it was, I guess, still considered maybe an open question of which side would the United States support in the war, if only because they had been assiduously attempting to avoid any involvement in it. But I mean, in reality, it was pretty clear that if the United States were to become involved in the war, it would be on the side in opposition to Nazi Germany and fascist Italy and the Axis with imperialist Japan as well. And but whatever, for whatever reason, there was this last minute, propaganda effort, I think probably with the blessing of the German government and the active participation, and maybe even at the urging of the German government, to see if you could mitigate American fervor for war by making it look like there was a serious question about whether or not you ought to intervene on the side of Germany. After all, German Americans were a pretty sizable chunk of the American population, and throw in just non-German American anti-Semites, and you might have something here. But I was struck really over the weekend by this reminder of the materials that were used and that were presented there in selling that rally and presented at the rally, that once again, just as we see today in these situations, it was chock full of references, self-referential material to their patriotism and heroism, that they were the ones carrying forward the true light of the Constitution, that they were patriots and real American heroes, and that the people trying to get the United States to oppose fascism and Nazism were really the traitors to America. And it's a remarkable parallel. At any rate, in terms of explaining why a person who was thinking, I'm sure at the time, of running for Attorney General would say things like, yes, I will steal a voting tabulation machine, take it apart, crack through the data, and publish the photos of that crime online, because you can't hold me criminally liable for such a heroic, patriotic, pro-American act. That would be farcical, you see. Anyway, let's see. Did we read this part of here? Yes. Oh, yes, right. And I was thinking also about that there might have been that calculation of either you were already thinking of running for Attorney General, or possibly you said, maybe I need to run for Attorney General to get myself out of this. Or at the very least, if I run for Attorney General, then the current Attorney General can be put in an uncomfortable position prosecuting me for my crime, because I will claim that this is a fascist trick, and a tyrannical, totalitarian trick of the Democratic regime, cracking down on their political opponents with trumped-up charges of doing exactly what I did, but doing it for political purposes. And they're right. Our system is weak in that way, and it's an excellent angle of attack. The Attorney General's office declined to comment on the specifics of its investigation, but said Nessel would take appropriate steps to remove herself and her department should a conflict arise. Those steps include requesting a special prosecutor to look at the election breaches, according to a letter from the Attorney General, current one, advising the Secretary of State of the request. The request was sent to the Prosecuting Attorney's Coordinating Council, an autonomous entity within the Attorney General's office that would decide whether a special prosecutor is warranted. Nessel's office started investigating the voting system security breaches after a request from Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. In a February statement, Benson said that at least one unnamed third party had gained access to tabulation machines and data drives from Richfield Township and Roscommon County. Jake Rollo, not Lake Rollo, though they may have such a lake, a spokesperson for the Secretary of State, said the office does not believe DePerno's team had legal approval to access ES&S voting equipment. I guess you better find that out, and soon. Rollo declined to comment further on the Attorney General's investigation, but emphasized its importance. To ensure Michigan's elections are secure in the future, there must be consequences now for the people who illegally access the state's voting machines, he said. It just happens to be our opponent in the election, so it's a little complicated. ES&S did not respond to a request for comment. Next section here is seizing on a glitch, which I hope will explain. So what made DePerno even want to do this in the first place? Voting and vote counting equipment is subject to strict chain of custody requirements to ensure accuracy and guard against fraud. Access to tabulators is tightly restricted, and any machine compromised by an unauthorized person is typically taken out of commission. The 4 cases being investigated by Nessel are among at least 17 incidents identified by Reuters nationwide in which Trump supporters gained or attempted to gain unauthorized access to voting equipment. In other words, breaking the law to prove how law-abiding they are. You know how it goes. Michigan accounts for 11 of these 17, by the way, reflecting how conspiracy theorists sought to capitalize on an error in the initial reporting of 2020 results in Antrim County to allege widespread fraud in the state without evidence. I believe I remember that we read about this earlier. A state review of the Antrim County incident found that a failure to properly update software caused a computer glitch that resulted in county officials initially reporting Joe Biden as the winner of the reliably Republican county. The officials quickly acknowledged and corrected the mistake, and Trump's victory was affirmed by a hand tally of every vote cast in Antrim County. DePerno seized on that confusion, filing a lawsuit making the unfounded claim that tabulators made by Colorado-based Dominion Voting System had been rigged to flip votes from Trump to Biden in Antrim County. No evidence of machine fraud or manipulation in the 2020 election has ever been presented in Michigan or any other state, and courts in Michigan and elsewhere have dismissed such claims as baseless. Dominion spokesperson Tony Fratto said. Is that where he went? Wow. What did he used to do? He was very active on Twitter all the time, Tony Fratto, and he was like a W guy, wasn't he? And was something of a anti-Trumper for all this time. But I didn't realize, is it just somebody who shares his name, or is it the Tony Fratto? Because Tony Fratto that I'm thinking of has got a Twitter bio that reads he's from Hamilton Place Strategies, is where he is currently parked. Were they consulting with the county government, or is it just another guy named Tony Fratto? I think I'm leaning towards that as the explanation. But where was I? I got to look for his name again and find that was totally distracting. Yeah, Dominion spokesman Tony Fratto. I mean, he could be consulting for Dominion. They're a big enough deal at this stage. All right. Well, I don't know. In early December 2020, 13th Circuit Court Judge Kevin Elsenheimer, a state judge, granted DePerno's legal team permission to take forensic images of Antrim County voting equipment to search for evidence of election fraud. The court order was limited to Antrim, where only Dominion equipment was used. The order did not extend to other jurisdictions or machines made by other voting system providers. So I guess there's room here for DePerno saying, I didn't realize that was the case, in which case you're not qualified to be Attorney General, or, well, we just did it anyway. I'm not certain which one it's going to be. Yet DePerno's team submitted 2 reports in April of 2021 to the court that revealed, this is interesting, so the court that said, yes, you can have access to forensic images, or take forensic images, whatever that even means, of Antrim County's Dominion equipment. And so they went, I guess, presumably, and did that. And then in submitting a report of their activities to the court, submitted a report based on their having seized something from Roscommon County made by ES&S, not Dominion. And they submitted this to the court. And why the court didn't smack them over the head immediately with the gavel, I don't know. But, all right. DePerno's team submitted 2 reports in April 2021 to the court that revealed they had also examined equipment made by ES&S. The report, written by Penrose, dated April 9th, contained a photograph of a summary tape with information about a tabulator's activity on election night, such as when results were submitted to the county. Among other things, the tape showed a sequence of figures, and it is here, and I guess that's the serial number. Do you want to know what it is? Do you care? I mean, it's a bunch of numbers. It won't mean anything to you. That is the serial number for one of 2 ES&S DS200 tabulators Richfield Township used during the 2020 vote, according to copies of documents obtained by Reuters through a public records request. So, did I understand that correctly, or did I confuse Roscommon County with Antrim? But Richmond, what was it? Is Richmond Township? Is that right? And is that in Richmond Township, Michigan? What county is that in? And the answer is, I don't know. Richmond Township. Macomb. Is that right? Or do I pronounce that correctly? I don't remember anymore. Macomb or Macomb County. Okay. Or is there another one? Sometimes some of these states have multiple. Yeah, I mean, here's a Richmond Township in Osceola County, Michigan. There's one in Macomb, Macabre, whichever. I don't know. Anything else? Marquette County. Oh, gosh. So they got them all over the place. Is there one in... Goodness. This is like no help whatsoever. You guys got to straighten this out. I mean, seriously. Don't you think it's ridiculous that you should have 4 or 5 of them? All right. Well, I guess I'll just have to read on and see if context helps me. So this is the serial number for one of 2 ES&S tabulators Richfield Township used during the 2020 vote, according to copies of documents obtained by Reuters through a public records request. Skoglund, the election security specialist consulted by Reuters, said the matching numbers indicate that the report's author had access to either Richfield's tabulator or a data drive containing the results and other information from the machine. There's no doubt in my mind that the Penrose photograph is output from that same DS200, that he had physical, hands-on access, Skoglund told reporters. A second person familiar with the workings of ES&S voting equipment examined the records obtained by Reuters and concurred that the tabulator tape showed in the Penrose report matches the machine with the same serial number. The Penrose report was part of a series of submissions from DePerno's team that failed to convince Judge Elsenheimer. This is the one who gave him the permission to look. And he just at the end said, yeah, okay, I see your report. Doesn't tell me enough. No, I don't agree with you anymore. At an April 12th, 2021 hearing, the judge shut down DePerno's attempt to subpoena several Michigan counties for access to election data and equipment. DePerno gave an interview later the same day to two right-wing websites, Gateway Pundit and 100% Fed Up. DePerno said that Penrose had examined an ES&S machine. He added that the team had also looked at Dominion equipment outside of Antrim County. So maybe he looked at an ES&S machine from Antrim. So it's not doubly violative of the judge's order, but just partially violative. The order was you can look at Dominion machines in Antrim, and he may have looked at an ES&S machine in Antrim. But I thought it was worse because I thought that they were saying he was looking at an ES&S machine from Roscommon County or some other county, but maybe it is in fact the same county. But at any rate, the attorney said he didn't consider Elsenheimer's ruling a dead end. Maybe there will be some county somewhere that decides to come forward and cooperate. That would be nice, DePerno told the websites. Yeah, well, maybe. In reality, DePerno's associates had already taken possession of voting machines from local offices in Richfield Township. There we are. I guess I was looking for Richmond Township. Is that because I misread it and searched the wrong thing, or is it because they said Richmond? No, they said Richfield Township, and I put Richmond, so that was the wrong thing. But I did learn along the way how many Richmond Townships there are in Michigan alone. So, okay, there's no doubt in my mind. Oh, we got to that one. I forgot how far up I scrolled in this one. In reality, DePerno's associates had already taken possession. It's interesting. So he's saying maybe some other county will have some information. That would be nice. But he already knew that they had possession of voting machines from other counties. So he was being coy about that. But then he turned up nothing from those counties' machines anyway. In reality, DePerno's associates had already taken possession of voting machines from local officials in Richfield Township in Roscommon County and Lake Township in Missaukee County, according to police records and text messages acquired through public records requests. Why this judge hasn't thrown him in jail, I have no idea. Lynch, the private investigator who worked with DePerno on his Antrim County case, exchanged texts with Lake Township clerk Corinda Winkleman. And on March 20th, 2021, Lynch asked for help accessing a Dominion device she had provided to him, according to the messages obtained by Reuters through a public records request. Winkleman shared with Lynch an operational manual and a password for the device, while also speculating on how election systems might be rigged. Which sounds great. I mean, at bottom, it's, here, take one of our voting machines. And by the way, here is how I think such voting machines could be rigged, which they will defend as. See, that was what I needed to look for evidence that it had already been rigged by Biden in the 2020 election. But viewed another way, it could be, hey, here's a way to rig it looking forward for the 2020 and 2024 elections, when we hope to use the machine to cheat on behalf of Republicans. How do I know which one you were trying to do? And does it really matter, since you weren't supposed to have access to this machine for any purpose whatsoever anyway? So are we entitled to think it's the more nefarious of the two explanations? Or do we even need to know which of the two explanations it is, because you're in violation of the law by having possession of this machine at all, no matter what you thought you were doing with it. That's the basics of the law. Elsenheimer dismissed the Antrim suit in May of 2021, a decision that was affirmed this year by the Michigan Court of Appeals. DePerno's fraud claims have been widely debunked. A Republican-led Michigan Senate committee issued a scathing report in June of 2021 that called DePerno's various allegations, quote, demonstrably false. So I guess you might want to know, did the Republicans on this Senate committee endorse DePerno do they endorse DePerno for, we might as well call him DePorno. right? His bid for Attorney General. Do they support him? Do they endorse him? I mean, your report said that all of his allegations were demonstrably false. Maybe you don't want to vote for that guy. In September of 2021, Trump endorsed DePorno, why not, as the Republican nominee for Michigan Attorney General, praising his pursuit of fair and accurate elections by stealing stuff, and his ongoing efforts to, quote, reveal the truth about the November 3rd presidential election scam. So that's where it winds up. I mean, the guy's just pretty much blatantly in illegal possession of voting machines to which he was never granted access. And Republicans in the state Senate say that he's a complete loon and all of his claims are false and baseless. But he's about to secure the nomination for Attorney General in Michigan. Isn't that exciting? Okay, it's troubling and weird, but I'm glad we're up to speed on it. Let's see. Other interesting things. This one requires more time. This one is foreign news, but what the hell, we might want to throw it in there too. And let's see. Oh, okay. There's more. All right. I wonder whether also from the Detroit News. Okay. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the story that Rebecca actually sent. I didn't do the click at the same time, because here's something that's actually a link to the Detroit News, not the Reuters story. I might have picked up the Reuters story independently over the weekend, but what she was sending was the story from the Detroit News that Nessel's office was seeking a special prosecutor in this election conspiracy probe of DePorno and others. But I think we're up to speed on that. But at least that straightens out a little bit of why we were in Reuters and not in the Detroit News. I see. So I confused the two in pocket here. It's very easy, as they are both illustrated with pictures of DePorno. Anyway, there's like 400 or 500 things to bring to your attention. I got to jump from there. Do I have time for this? I'll read as much as I can. Not the foreign news, but the domestic news. Something that I should have mentioned on Friday. A report in Jezebel. Laura Bassett writing up what was essentially the exchange between Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Chris Wray of the FBI during an oversight hearing in the Senate's Judiciary Committee, most likely, on Friday, in which it was revealed, they got to the bottom of, basically parsed through all the words to figure out, okay, what happened with that supposed additional background investigation of Brett Kavanaugh during his confirmation hearings? And the answer is just what Whitehouse said the whole time, which was that the FBI opened up that tip line, and please tell us what you might know about these allegations of sexual assault against Kavanaugh. And they did, in fact, get a bunch of tips, and then they basically threw them in the garbage. They got 4,500 calls, 4,500 tips, verifiable tips about Kavanaugh's past sexual assault-related behavior. And after some parsing, they finally got Ray to explain it. What they did with this, they got lots and lots of calls. They reviewed the calls, and he was sort of standing behind that. We did do a review, but as it turns out, it was a review to separate calls that were about Kavanaugh's sexual assault-related behavior and things that were not related to it, whether they were about something else or they just got the wrong number or I don't know what. But 4,500 of them were separated out as, yes, these are responsive to our request for information about Kavanaugh's alleged sexual assault-related behavior. And then what they did with them was no further review whatsoever from the FBI about the substance of the allegations or anything like that. Instead, they gathered them all up and handed them over to the White House counsel's office. Patsy Baloney, I guess, got a hold of those things. And they then handed instructions back to the FBI what to do, including who among the tipsters they were allowed to talk to and what questions they were allowed to ask these tipsters. So it was a total whitewash, pretty much like we all thought, pretty much as White House explained that it was, and it has taken now, as he points out, 4 years to finally get the director of the FBI to admit that, yeah, they set up a tip line, but all it was a capture and kill operation. We captured the tips on his alleged rapey behavior, and we send them to the White House, and the White House says, don't investigate any of these things, and that's the end of the investigation. And at the end of the week, they say, well, we've turned up no evidence. There's no evidence that he actually behaves like that, and that's because that evidence was gathered up and flushed down the toilet. So who better to write about things like that than the folks at Jezebel? Laura Bassett got the job. 4,500 tips about Kavanaugh's sexual assault were punted to the Trump White House, FBI director admits. Christopher Wray confirmed Thursday, not Friday, that the FBI sent thousands of tips to Trump's team, who then decided whom the FBI could interview in their probe. All right, so, that ain't great, is what I've got to say about that. There's a nice write-up of it here, including the transcript or partial transcript of the exchange between Wray and White House. That is to say, Sheldon White House, not the White House. But, yep, that's what it comes down to. As Laura puts it, basically, Trump wanted Kavanaugh confirmed, and he was easily able to make sure that no corroborating evidence surfaced that would bolster Christine Blasey Ford's testimony that Kavanaugh attempted to rape her at a party when they were teenagers. White House previously said in June, that is Senator White House, when it was first revealed how many tips the FBI actually received about Kavanaugh from its tip line, that it was obvious the investigation into Kavanaugh was fully rigged by Trump. This long-delayed answer confirms how badly we were spun by Director Wray and the FBI in the Kavanaugh background investigation and hearing. White House wrote on Twitter, I charge that the tip line was really a tip dump, with all the tips going straight to the dumpster without investigation. In fact, it was a tip dump where all the tips went straight to the White House counsel without investigation.
From
Same
NetworksRadio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right. Well, I know that needs more time, but I really wanted to throw it in there. What comes next, of course, is the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, who will round up, probably about 100% of these stories, plus 100% new content that we haven't gotten to yet today from around the country, around the world. You need to stay tuned for his take on this next.